shoulder.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This will be probably a little less technical than the last talk. I'm nowhere near the brilliant minds, the other brilliant minds that are obviously on this call. But yeah, I was invited in to talk about the film that independent film that I'm developing called I Adore My 64. That really centralizes on the Commodore 64 itself and the global impact that it's had on the history of computers, but also and specifically on the community that surrounds the 64 today. So there's been quite a number of films, videos, things out there about the history of Commodore as a company, the history of the Commodore 64 itself, and some of the major figures within the company, the president, Jack Tramiel, and other people. So I feel like, you know, that ground's sort of been covered. But this film is specifically about the people who are, you know, keeping the 64 alive today: preservationists, collectors, software engineers, hardware engineers. It's amazing to me that this gigantic community, global community, still exists today. So rolling back a little bit on my own story, you know, like a lot of people, and I think someone was even mentioning it earlier in this call, I got a Commodore 64 when I was 10 years old, and really was a huge part of my life. I wasn't somebody who, you know, was terribly interested in home computers before that, but for whatever reason, my parents decided to get that for us, and it really was just a seminal moment in my life. I spent a lot of time with it. Did learn how to program BASIC and had a lot of fun with that. But, you know, over time started to figure out that, like, you know, okay, these people were writing these video games. They're not writing it in BASIC because BASIC is way too slow to do that. You know, this is probably 6th or 7th grade for me. So I wanted to sort of figure out, like, okay, how's this being done? And of course, back then there was no, you know, publicly available internet. So I headed off to my local library, and I think maybe I'd gotten the idea that it had something to do with assembly language from like some computer magazines that Commodore specific computer magazines I was getting at the time. I think it was Run magazine was probably the main one I read and subscribed to. And so I think from that I figured out that it's got something to do with machine language. So I went to the library, got a book on machine language, and it just flew right over my head, you know, being in 6th or 7th grade. So I never became, you know, a seminal coder, and probably honestly not smart enough to do that. But in 2017, around 2017, 2018, my second daughter was born. And, you know, as a lot of new parents, you're up crazy hours of the night taking care of, you know, your newborn. And I was poking around in the internet and came across a video from Dan Wood. If any of you guys recognize that name, he's one of the hosts of the Retro Hour podcast. And he created this video probably about 10 years ago now, showing how the Commodore 64 could get on the internet. And I was like, what? Just, you know, my mind just about exploded. I'm like, no way. And just watching that video, it sort of reignited my interest in the 64. You know, the original 64 I had is just like the one behind me. It was a bread bin. And I probably had that from like 82 or 83 to like 90-ish. And then maybe 89. And it blew up. I think it was the VIC-2. In hindsight, the VIC-2 chip probably blew up. Just lost video on it, but ended up getting a C64C and kept that right up until I left for college, and still have that one, and it still works. So just amazing that some of these original machines, you know, 40, 41 years later are still running. But so yeah, Commodore was a part of all my growing up years. And then when I went to college here in the States, you know, the Amiga was not a popular machine for people at home. You know, we didn't really have the 500s and the 1200s in our market. But one thing that it was really had a presence in was video editing, with the advent of the new tech video toaster. So the video toaster kind of democratized video editing and filmmaking, you know, for the average person. kind of in the way that computers did that for desktop publishing. It used to be that was a very expensive proposition to get into, and all of a sudden computers kind of democratized that. And it was the same with video editing and the Amiga. And so I became a communications major in college, and that really started my filmmaking career. And I used an Amiga 2000 there and got really familiar with it and fell in love with it. And then at my first job too, as a video production and editor and filmmaker, I used an Amiga 2000 with a video toaster for a number of years. So Commodore continued to be a part of my life, and I kind of left off of it probably like 2000 or so. But then, like I said, back in 2018, 2017, saw that video from Dan and really launched my interest in it again. And, just became a part of the worldwide community through the internet. Like the internet has done so much for retro computing in general, and Commodore and the 64 specifically, because there's just so many people around the world who now can be connected to each other through the internet. And I was just really floored by all of that, like how many people, not only in North America, in the States where I live, but everywhere, just so interested in the 64, still developing hardware. There's new games coming out all the time for the 64. It seems like every day can do more and more amazing things. Somebody was got Linux to run on a Commodore 64, sort of. And so, just like this things we're seeing today, there's just so many amazing people are still working with it. And why? It was kind of like you were just saying, like, because it's fun. It's still fun and people still love it. So yeah, the idea for the film really began because, as I was saying, I'm not a coder, and I'm definitely not a hardware developer. I've since I got back into it, I have bought and sold a number of 64s and have a collection, and a lot of the things I never had when I was growing up, like a PET and Amiga 1200, Amiga 500, plus fours, and of course 64s. I have a good number of 64s. But I started to think about, well, I'd really like to contribute to the community, because so many people along the way helped me. They helped me in repairs, they helped me understand different things, and like, what can I do, to sort of give back to this community? And I can't develop software. I can't really develop hardware. That's not going to be the ways that I can contribute. But, that point, I'd been a filmmaker for 25 years. So I started to think about, like, what kind of film could I do that would really benefit the community? And sort of had this aha moment of like, well, why not make a film about the community? That would help the community. And sort of saw that as a gap in some of the content that's been produced over the years, especially in the last 10 years. There's been a good number of documentaries and tons of videos, and they are all great. I'm not knocking them at all, but I think sort of the history has been covered. So I think what people really don't know about is the community as it exists today. I know I was shocked to find out about it. And, here we are all sitting together in this call. It's just another testament to the fact that this community is out there and exists. And I think there are many people that grow up with a 64 and would probably enjoy re-experiencing it and being a part of a community that loves it, but they don't know about it. I didn't know about it. And yet, I have a couple 64 t-shirts, and whenever I'm out and about where I live and I wear them, almost invariably I get somebody who's like, hey, is that computer from the 80s? And I say, yeah. And that's when the stories start pouring out, like, oh, I had one of those when I was a kid, spent so many hours on it, played this game and that game, or I played at a friend's house, or we just would stay up all night, and just that, like, it's such a cultural phenomenon. And yet in some ways that's sort of been lost in history. Like, if you talk to people today, especially, I think if you talk to anybody 35 or under and you ask them, what do you think is the most popular best-selling home computer of all time? They're going to probably say the IBM PC, or they're going to say the Apple II, because, those are the companies that were kind of the winners, right? They still exist today. They went on. But the truth is, the Commodore 64 is still the #1 best-selling home computer, single model in all of history. And it's just an amazing testament to the cultural impact it had. And yet that's sort of been erased from the general consciousness. Of course, the people in the community love it and know how impactful it was, but people outside the community tend to think, oh yeah, Apple was responsible for all that. And it's been really interesting. You know, one of the things that we wanted to do right away in order to sort of gain people's confidence and trust in our ability to do this was produce a 10-minute preview. So in some of those interviews, there's been some amazing details that have come forward, including, like, you know, the fact that Apple might not even have existed without the engineers from Commodore, because Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs were in their garage working on the Apple I, and they actually couldn't get it working until Chuck Peddle, you know, an engineer from Commodore, came over and assisted them. And during that conversation, it's reportedly, and I've heard it from several different sources, so I tend to think it's true, that Steve Jobs said to Peddle, like, oh, we're going to be a really huge computer company. When we launch this project, Commodore should probably buy us. And he offered Apple to Commodore for $2 million right there on the spot. And Wozniak talked about, like, how embarrassed he was by that. But just think if that had happened, like, the history between Apple and Commodore would be completely different. But yeah, I think that's part of the purpose of the film too, is just sort of to write some of the details of history and help people understand that the Commodore 64 really was just a force within the early home computer market. You know, it's definitely not going to be a history film. And I think if you watch the preview, the 10-minute preview, which has done amazingly well, it's got like 70,000 views already. And you will see in there that it's really about the people. You know, we love the 64, and you know, it's amazing what it can do, but it's sort of like an examination of the people who love it today and who are still keeping it alive. So it's not a history video, and it's not extremely technical on any level, but it is a lot of fun visiting these different people and seeing their passion and their love for the 64. So up to this point, the interviewees that we've met with and shot with and appear in the preview are David Murray, who, you know, better known as the 8-bit guy, and then Bo Zimmerman, who, if you're if you're involved in the Commodore scene at all, you probably have heard Bo's name. You know that he has a gigantic collection of Commodore PETs, Amigas, Commodore PCs. Like, he has a ton of stuff. And he has contributed an enormous amount to the community, software, hardware. Like, he was an awesome guy, and David too, just both very humble. All the people we have interacted with have been really humble and gave really great interviews and were very gracious to us. And then we had a chance to interact with the Toronto Pet Users Group, you know, which is the oldest Commodore users group in existence. And has been running for, I forget how many years, like being called the Toronto Pet Users Group. You can imagine how long it's been running. And they run a show called World of Commodore every year, which is a big show outside of Toronto. And we visited that. And then we had a chance to interview one of the members and who has been involved in leadership of TPUG in the past, and that's Leif Bloomquist. And he gave a great interview as well. And then the fourth interviewee is Anthony Becker. And he, for a long time, was a part of the Guru Meditation channel. And he has a huge collection himself and tells a story about how he really started out on the 64. And one of the prized possessions in his collection is a prototype Commodore 65, which not everybody knows about. And he relates a story about how he bought that for $40. And now some of those Commodore 65 prototypes have sold for, I think, $80,000 is the top price I've heard. So he said to me, yeah, should have bought a few more, might have been able to retire by now. So just, it's been so much fun up to this point, but up to this point, it's been a pretty much self-funded effort. And so I've kind of reached as far as I can go under my own steam. So I'm really hoping that the community will get behind this effort and make the film become a reality. So we're about a little over halfway through our 30-day campaign. We started at September 5th and it ends October 5th. And we're at about roughly a little bit over a quarter of our goal right now, which seems low, but when looking at the analytics from the platform we're using, it's actually, for the most part, performing above average. So we're still very hopeful that we're going to meet our goal of $25,000. And, the further we go above that goal, then, the higher quality, the longer the film can be, and the more people that we can interview and bring into the film. So yeah, I really appreciate the time here. And I'll of course entertain any questions that might come up, but I've gone over already, so I apologize for that.
No, that's fine. You're more than welcome. Many thanks.
Yeah.
There are certainly questions. At least I have a few. So yeah, never best served than by myself. I will start with my
All
own
right. Yeah,
questions.
no problem.
Yeah. So indeed, I was going to ask about the crowdfunding status, but you just mentioned it. But then, yeah, because I watched actually the 10 minutes preview that is available, and that looks really good. But so that was my question. It's already filmed, I guess. So you have this crowdfunding. Is it then for the distribution? Do you have already plans like how will that be distributed? Is it via your own platform or via film distributors? Can we expect that to be I don't know, I would say like on Amazon Prime or Netflix or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's explained somewhat in the on the campaign website, but the funding is actually for the production. So the big advantage that I have is that I'm able to do all the post-production myself at basically zero cost, because I have been a filmmaker and editor for 20 years. So the expense of the film, of course, is, equipment to shoot it and the travel costs. And that's what really makes the documentary maybe more expensive than like a documentary that somebody might shoot in a local area and they don't have to travel very far. It's like, well, the interviewees are all over the place. And of course it takes time, money, and effort to get to where they are and interview them where they are. And really that was the approach we wanted to take from the very beginning. Like, we could very easily record video calls, but it's a different feel when you can be on site with that person, see their collection, shoot B-roll, interview them one-on-one. And so if you watch the preview, you kind of understand the style of the film and the direction that we're going. So, but the target deployment is Amazon Prime. And the reason for that being that Netflix is and some of the other streaming platforms, their standards are very high. And if I tried to meet those standards, we'd be into the hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to qualify for those platforms. So I don't want to try to run it on my own platform either, because then I think it will probably hurt viewership. But our goal right now is to make it as the final goal is to make it something that can be purchased on Prime and watched. And there are Blu-ray incentives for people who donate $75 or more. So, if you jump in and you pledge at that level, then you'll end up with probably what's going to be very, very few of the, quote unquote, hard copies of the film. And there's some other incentives there too, which you can check out. But yeah, Amazon Prime is our target deployment.
Good. Yeah. Many thanks.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are other questions. Otherwise, let me see in the chat. I don't see on Facebook neither. But maybe then just a comment, an extra comment from my side. You mentioned that Amiga was not for the home users in the US, while actually in Europe it was mostly used by home users. So it's really quite a difference there. And then when I understand that in your career, so you've been using more Amigas than certainly than 64, of course. So maybe that's your next film.
Well, there's Viva Amiga, which I'm sure maybe a lot of you have seen or heard of. That's great. documentary about the Amiga, and they interview some essential people in there who, you know, were a part of its creation and development. But yeah, I think there's always room for more content about whether it's the 64 or Commodore machine in general, or other machines. Like that's sort of a wide open field. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot more opportunity out there.
Good. Thanks.
Yeah.
Anybody from the call, any questions? I don't see them in the chat, but maybe I'm not. So if you have a question, just shoot it.
No
Apparently
question,
not,
Ben.
so-
Looking forward to the film.
Oh, thank you. I don't know who that was, but thank you.
That's right. This is Jessica.
Oh, Jessica, there you are. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Good, many thanks. I will then stop the recording.